Ever wondered if there was a way to plan and optimize your resilience and mental health the way that you optimize business outcomes through a strategic planning process? No? Well, you probably should. So that's what we're talking about on today's episode. Welcome to the Hard Skills Show, where we discuss how to develop the most nuanced and challenging soft skills needed to drive significant systemic change to make a real impact through your leadership. I'm your host, Dr. Mira Brancu, and today's guest is Dr. Marie-Helene Pelletier. Also, she calls herself as MH, so that's what I will call her today. She is a bilingual practicing psychologist and the author of Resilience Plan Model. With over 20 years of experience in clinical psychology and advisory workplace psychology, with a Ph.D. and an MBA. She's a member of the Global Clinical Practice Network of the World Health Organization, with a variety of leadership experiences on various boards and organizations in her own field and across her expertise, including the Canadian Psychological Association and International Association of Applied Psychology. Now, she will be sharing with us how to strategically optimize our work performance, resilience, and mental health, which I feel like is the topic of the last 4 years. It's such an important topic to be talking about today, and it's perfect for our season 3's focus on mapping a leadership strategy. So be ready, take notes, reflect deeply. I always learn something from our guests, and I know I'm going to learn a lot from our guests today. Identify at least one small step to further develop your hard skills muscle with her. So great to have you on the show, MH.
Oh, Mira, thank you. I can't wait to have our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, out of curiosity, I mean, you've had such a interesting career. How did you get to this place? Like, what was the thing that piqued your interest in combining business and leadership with a mental health strategy and a resilience strategy?
I know it's a short answer is I followed my nose at various decision points, but three key decision points led to this. One is, so I'm originally from the East Coast, Quebec City, and early in my career, I moved up north in that province. That was my first professional experience. All of this was now a couple of decades ago. So prior to FaceTime, internet, telehealth, doing things from a distance. And so I realized there was a really big problem of accessibility to good quality services. So then I moved to the West Coast, British Columbia, did my PhD research in telehealth over 20 years ago. At the time, I had to explain it every single time. And
Yeah.
I had to have a lot of funding. I had to have a lot of people working for me. Some of them I could not even pay. And I had to use 6 telephone lines to transmit video and audio data at the time because the internet was too slow. All this to say that it led to a lot of management. And that's when, after my PhD, I decided to do an MBA and then ended up working in management. And then in the recent years, doing the speaking, the executive coaching, and still a small practice as psychologist. But then in my practice, I ended up, just by the virtue of my combined background, working with a lot of professionals and leaders. And often they would say things like, MH, what's my problem? I've been dealing with very high demands, bigger than the ones I'm dealing with right now. I'm trying to do the same things and it's not working. What's my problem? And often I found myself using concepts from strategy in business to help the situation make sense. And that's how bringing all this together led to so many people, yes, quite a few, say something like, okay, this is now so helpful for me. I'm going to take this and move forward, but I wish I knew this earlier. And all this led to the book. So that's the short story of how I got there.
Super interesting. Out of curiosity, in Canada, back when you first started telehealth, which was way before anybody was thinking about it, way before it was cool, like you said, before people even knew what it meant. I remember in the States, it's only been like recently through the COVID era and maybe close before that they sort of figured out how to do telehealth across state lines because every state has its own board to review and approve the work of psychologists within that state. Is that the same in Canada? Did you have to work through that?
So I did not have to work through that at the time to do my research, because I was just using people located here in British Columbia, so it dealt with that. But at the time, I was even dealing with professional associations not even wanting to give me an opinion about doing research this way, because it was so, they were all like, well, you are to use the same principles that you are required to use based on your registration and the registration of who's supervising your work. Like, they were very scared to say anything, really. But now the situation is the same in the US. Yeah, we are regulated by province. And so the work across provinces requires a lot of discussions and conversations and processes to at times make it happen. Sometimes it's out of necessity. We have very small provinces in the Atlantic region, for example, where without a possibility to work across provinces, it really impacts negatively the end users.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm veering off a little bit here, but I'm so interested in like access to care, right? And the a while back, I was doing research on expanding services to suicidal patients who were living in rural areas. And they had, it was very difficult to access services when you're in rural areas, and even more difficult when, you're struggling with suicidal thoughts, and it's just hard to reach out and ask for help in the first place. And so we had to go through asking permission from our organization to be able to offer this to patients, and they were very nervous about it. And we're like, look, they either get the services in this way or they don't get the services, so what would you want? Access is important. So I just really commend you for even back then trying to push the envelope and trying to innovate. So speaking of innovation, let's talk about now how you sort of crossed over to applying strategy, a strategic mapping kind of idea to people coming to you for something quite different that they weren't expecting to get, kind of like mapping the strategy around resilience or mental health. How did you start applying that? What did it look like?
I know it was the missing link, because especially with the pandemic, everyone everywhere heard so much more about mental health. Yay for us psychologists, but it did help everyone to have more information. So now most people know that there are a number of things that we know solidly based in research that if we do these things, it will benefit not just our physical health, but our psychological health. Okay, everyone knows this. If I'm in front of an audience of any number of people, they can all name the kinds of things that we know from research will make a difference, like exercise, cardio, strength training, meditative activity, nutrition, relationships with people, sleep, volunteer work, time in nature, all these things. So the problem is not in knowing, it's in implementing. And everyone's life is full and often overflowing. So most people trust the research, would love to incorporate these aspects in their lives, but they feel very stuck. They can't. And there are many other challenges that happen in not implementing. Sometimes people will think they don't need it that much. Others need it more than them. All kinds of things there. So the way to incorporate these things in their lives is not just creating more motivation or new structures or a better list or forcing themselves to buy a membership. It's to be strategic, the same way that in business, if we have a great idea here, we don't just proceed and launch the product or the service. We'll have a great idea, and then we'll do a number of things to learn more about the context. Who else is offering this? How much are they charging for it? How much are people willing to pay for this? What forces in the future might impact the demand for this product or service? We're looking at all these elements of the context. And so if we do the same thing here for our resilience, then we actually have a chance of creating a plan, literally the same way we would do in business, strategic pillars, tactics under each pillars, all these things that then lead to action. And that's what changes everything.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Knowing is half the battle, as they say, but doing is the hard part. That's the hard skill, right? Before we get into sort of how we might design something like this, how to implement, let's just talk about resilience. Like it's a word that's used so often. I feel like it's now a little bit of a buzzword. How would you define it? And when would people need to be thinking about creating a plan for it?
So to the second question, now everyone needs it now, regardless of if you're on a 0 to 100 scale. If you feel your resilience at 100, fabulous. Build a plan now to help sustain it. If you're halfway, wonderful. We can nourish it further and build it. And if you're at 0, you may need also to connect with someone to help, because by then you have very little energy. But yes, things can change. So we all need to do it. And I love that you're asking the question, because as it turns out, it's not just the fact that we're using the word a lot, but even in the academic literature, there are many definitions of resilience. And so, but the one many are using, the one I'm using, is our ability to go through adversity and come out even stronger. So there is a growth mindset to this. And there is also the important notion that the adversity here that we're going through, often we think about it as an acute moment, which of course it can be that. It can be many acute moments. It can also be many acute moments combined with one or more chronic demands that are there in the background, which often we tend to either minimize or ignore because we're like, well, everyone has this. Well, yes, even if everyone went through a pandemic, or everyone is dealing with AI coming through our work lives and personal lives as well, it still represents a demand. So being realistic about the demands is a key component.
Yeah, and also, having done a lot of research in post-traumatic stress disorder, we know that you could have two people go through the same exact experience, traumatic experience, and one person will end up in this kind of trajectory, sort of with post-traumatic growth or recovery, like quick recovery, and then another person will not. And it has to do with so many complex interacting factors. So resilience is about the same kind of thing. Like, just because, oh yeah, we're all going through it, so it's no big deal. Well, for some people it's a bigger deal than others, and it's good to know what that is at the individual level. And sometimes it's good to know at the team level and organizational level as well. So we're reaching an ad break. When we come back, let's get into that sort of like individual team management, organizational level resilience, because I'm super curious to hear what you have to say about that. You're all listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest, Dr. M.H. Pelletier. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to join our online audience and ask questions right now, we can answer them in real time. You can find us on LinkedIn or YouTube at talkradio.nyc, and we'll be right back with our guest in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business, or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. M.H. Pelletier. So we just got done talking about like the sort of thinking about when to start planning for or create a strategic plan for your resilience. The answer is all the time, people, all the time. And as we were talking, I was thinking, okay, this is clear for how to apply it at the individual level, but there is a place for it at the organizational level and team level even. And I'm curious, what do you see, where do you see that mental health, a focus on mental health and resilience has a place at the team and organizational level and for leadership?
Yes, absolutely. And it's critical because it has a place there and because it also does not entirely reside in us as individuals. And that's very important because if we start thinking that this is all in my hands as an individual, on one hand, it's beautiful. Yes, you do have a lot of agency. However, it would not be realistic to think that 100% of it belongs to your hands because the workplace is a system. So there is the individual, the team, the organization, and even the organization is in this city, in this country at this moment in time. So there's many variables that will influence the resilience of this overall system. So that's very important for that reason. So for a team and for an organization, the definition goes the same way. Our ability, say, as a team to go through adversity and come out even stronger. And we know from research that the resilience of a team is not the individual resilience of each person in that team. It does help, but it does not mean that we will be resilient as a team. As a team, we're looking at, are we clear? And that's often led by the leader of the team, but it could be brought up by anyone on the team because we all influence it. Are we clear on our goals in this moment as a team? So we know which team we are, obviously, but right now, which projects are top priority? So that clarity on goal is significant and very important. And the second key piece we find in research, because teams will differ, right? Size, hierarchy, virtual or not, combination, whatever, all kinds of things. But all teams need psychological safety. So that context where it's possible for me as one person out of 50 to say that I have a different perspective on what we just discussed, even if 49 other people are saying something opposite, right? So these are characteristics that will contribute to teams being more resilient. And at the organizational level, as we have more and more teams doing this and being more resilient, the organization also becomes more resilient. And at the organizational level, same things translate. We will be able to go through adversity better together. And concretely, it often means organizations will be less internally focused and keep more of a balance between being internally and externally focused. And to give you an example, that's often what we'll see if, say, an organization is being acquired by another or there's a merger. If the smaller organization is worried and not so resilient, it will turn internally. And that puts them at risk because then we're not looking at what's going on in the market, right? So building that resilience is important at the organization level as well.
Yeah. And I can also see a lot of ties between that and the burnout literature and, you know, how you think about sort of intervening in burnout is we often think, oh, you know, you should do a lot of things that are at the individual level, like a gratitude journal and walking and exercise and, you know, take time out for yourself. And all of these things do help at the individual level, but there is an ecosystem around you usually. And the literature says, and most of the literature that I read is mostly in the healthcare and academic space. And in that space, when you have 60% inching up to 70% of people saying that they're burned out, that is not an individual level problem anymore. That is an organizational and system level problem, and sometimes industry level problem, right? Right now, it's such a disrupted industry that is adding to it. And so you have to think about it at multiple levels, including at that highest level, and think what will make an impact across people, not just between people. And I'm hearing a lot of parallels here.
Oh, yes, it absolutely is true. That's extremely important. When we think about burnout, whether it's for ourselves, people in our teams, people in our organizations, we do need to think about all these components of the system. And yeah, we do know from research that a strong component, if we think of burnout as a breakup in the relationship between the individual and their workplace, that means that, yeah, there are things I can do as an individual, and there are things the workplace can do on that side of the relationship. And we know from research that things like making sure we invest in civility and respect, making sure that we invest in recognition, making sure we pay attention to workload. And I know auditors may be thinking, oh, workload, what are we going to do? It's what it is. For example, it may just mean bringing up in our teams a conversation about one of the largest irritants in the work we do, putting a microscope on that irritant and finding ways to make it less of an irritant. And that is not going to be a 99% change in the workload, but it's going to be a small change that often will have a very large impact. So that's on the employer side. But on the individual side, we don't want to also just say, well, it's all in my employer's hands. That's for them to change. Because while change may or may not happen, and fast or not fast enough, you here as individual have a lot of agency, and we want to make sure we use it.
Yeah, there is responsibility on both sides, and organizations and leaders cannot put everything on the individual to manage their mental health and burnout when part of the impact is coming from the system. And at the same time, people can't come to work assuming all of their mental health and resiliency needs could get met through just that system alone. There's an interaction there, right? Yeah. Absolutely. If people work on their resiliency, and if teams and organizations do so in the way that you're thinking about it, could it impact burnout? What do you see as sort of the effect?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes, it does. And I mean, a lot of the focus on my more recent book is on the individual. I do talk a bit about team there, but there is a significant impact because especially professionals and leaders, so they'll understand all this intellectually, and they'll think about all this for people around them in their teams, their colleagues, and all this, and not really for themselves. And so what that means is they stay, and I say they, at times I've thought this way, and many people have, we get to a place almost where we think we're a bit immune to this, that we are inherently resilient and that we can go through whatever we need to go through here. If instead we're investing in our resilience in a strategic way, so the core component of this means that I'm taking my actual context into account. So what I'm investing actually works. It's not just a wish or a thought or something that's not happening. Then what that means is I will take more proactive actions to identify if I'm sliding towards the burnout here, and take actions, get resources, change certain things, that kind of thing. So yes, there is an opportunity to decrease risk of burnout for ourselves, but also for others.
Nice. So if we know this, right, and we sort of recognize what are the biggest barriers, especially like in the workplace, as we're trying to work on our resilience, and as we're thinking about mental health awareness for ourselves, what are the what are the biggest barriers? What happens?
Yes.
What do you see with your clients? Yeah.
Sorry, say it again.
What do you see with your clients too?
Yes. Yes, I hear it. Clients, when I give keynotes, I hear it everywhere. The main ones that I hear, so some we've touched on, but I'll go through some of. Some of the possibly the biggest barrier is thinking that we are resilient as it's part of our personality. So obviously I don't need to do anything about it because that's who I am. Look at all the things I've gone through successfully and managed and figured out, and I made it here. So obviously it must be in me. And that's mistake number one. It's not a personality trait. Another one is to think that it's not necessarily me, but I cannot influence it. It's going to be what it is, kind of thing. And so I don't do anything about it. And that's a mistake. There are many ways in which we can actually increase that baseline for ourselves and people around us, in our teams, colleagues around us, that kind of thing. And so another one that gets in the way also is sometimes what I call being too optimistically biased. So a tendency to think that we're actually doing better than we are. So when looking at all the demands I need to face right now, I may ask someone, so, what kinds of demands are you facing? And often they'll list like 1, 2, maybe 3 things that are going on at work. And then I'll say, okay, but not just the negative ones. What else? Oh, well, I just got this promotion. I'm helping this person because they're going on mat leave, that kind of thing. Happy to do it. Well, that's still a demand. And then how about on the personal side? Well, that's personal. So of course, everything's fine there. Well, not necessarily. The demands that we're facing, they don't have lanes. So the demands we're needing to face on the personal side also need to go on that list. And so just that tendency to minimize the demands we're facing, and then the tendency to overestimate our sources of supply. So I'll ask people, so what kinds of things do you do that probably bring back resilience for you? And then they'll say, well, I try to go to the gym 3 times a week, for a good 45 minutes. I say, great. So in the past 2 weeks, how many times? And they say, well, past 2 weeks have been particularly busy. So no, but in general, yes. Well, then that means it's not going on your list. And so then as people start looking at this, then they realize we need to do something about it.
Yeah. Oh, those are all so good and so right on. I'm thinking about so I work with a lot of overachievers, hyperachievers, and they're just go, and they're so used to functioning at such a high level, at such a capacity. And they've gotten used to that state, that pace. So they don't always pay attention to the internal things that are happening when their body is starting to break down and scream at them and say, slow down, please. Because part of them is also like on a high when they're productive. And sometimes hyperproductivity, overzealousness, overambitious, there is a drug. So it feels like a drug sometimes, to the point where you're overlooking the things that you just mentioned. So I'm really relating and thinking about some of our clients. So when we come back from this next ad break, let's think about how different kinds of these experiences, how people can start developing and thinking through that resiliency plan. Let's get into some tactics with you. Okay. You're listening to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest, Dr. M.H. Pelletier. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. and we'll be right back with our guest in just a moment.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest, Dr. M.H. Pelletier, who wrote the book on resilience and creating a resilience plan. And we were just talking about some lesser known risk factors for not creating a resilience plan, right? Things like being too optimistically biased, the belief that I am resilient, and fooling ourselves, right? The belief that I can't influence it and not believing in ourselves enough. The overestimation of supply and underestimation of demands. I love thinking about it in that way and applying the supply demand to our own resources. Never thought about that.
Yes, it literally came out of me as a necessity when working with people who just kept thinking this way. And again, many times in my life, I have also kept thinking this way. And as you said, it's in part how we developed our own thinking, but it's also the feedback we're receiving from others, right? Oh, you, Mira, you can take things. We can give this to Mira, no problem. And you get to a point where you're like, yeah, bring it on, right? And it's wonderful to some degree, but pushed to the extreme, no, it isn't. The reality is we are not the rock of anything. We are human. And so fabulously capable, but need to be realistic.
Yeah. So tell us about the resilience plan, your resilience plan. What is involved, and what do you have people think about?
Yes. The way, one of the images I use in the book is that of a DNA strand. So you have the two sides, and I say, so number one, you need to think about both your personal and professional together, even though the book is focused on your work performance and mental health. So it is a work focus. The only way to succeed is to look at both. We cannot just actually look at work. We have to look at both. Number one. Number two, if you stay with this image of the DNA strand, you have usually 4 rungs, like a ladder kind of thing. And so what I've done is extracted from tools we use in strategy in business, things that people are familiar with or will connect with very easily, that will help us just zero in on information we need to create a strategic plan that takes our context into account. So one is your values. What's most important for you in life? We ask this often as psychologists in different contexts. Here, just like in business, business would be clear on what are their values, their mission, their vision. Same thing here. We need to connect with that quickly. Lots of leaders have already done this type of work before. Fine, we'll take you 10 minutes or less. Write it down. Then we want to look at our sources of supply and demand in a realistic way, similar to what we were describing earlier. Literally, table, 2 columns, you put the information there. And I have to tell you, many, many times, folks have told me it creates such a shift in their perspective just doing this writing of the demands and supply piece that this is a core component to it. But again, all of these exercises, and I write this in the book, they're often 5 minutes. Nothing long, nothing complicated. If you've done strategy work before, it could be elongated, but the reality is it could also be very straightforward. And that's what we're aiming for here. Because again, I know your life is very full or overflowing. The next piece is literally doing similar to when you do a SWOT analysis on the strategy side in business, where you're looking at internally what our strengths and weaknesses, externally opportunities and threats. So here, let's do this for us as individuals. So internally, what helps me with my resilience? Well, I naturally enjoy exercising, let's say. I like it when I have a chance. Good. What's internally a challenge is I tend to say yes. If something's exciting for me, my schedule may be full, but I may still say yes, for example. Right? And on the external side, what helps me on my resilience? Well, maybe you live right now in an area where you can actually step outside and start walking. So that helps. That's an external part of your environment that makes it easier. And an external threat may be that you just accepted a new role, and at the same time, the boss left the organization. So you're now in an external context where it's going to be made much harder. So these are examples, but we fill each of these quadrants even more to really have a good, realistic read on your context. And then you craft your strategy. Usually I suggest 3 pillars. You could go up to 5, but you don't want too many. And you put actions. But here's a key thing here. All the actions need to be so small, so doable, you can start tomorrow. If they are bigger, more aspirational maybe, or wishful thinking, whatever, you need to scale them right down. And so I could give you an example of what that could look like, but that's the overall process.
Yeah, I know I'm talking to a psychologist when the plan is gather some data, figure out what the right data is to evaluate. And she has just shared that with us. What is the right data to gather? The values, the mission, the vision, the supply, the demand, the SWOT analysis for yourself, right? That's gather the data, and then you can create a strategy. And then if you're going to create a strategy, make it realistic, make it winnable, right? So that you can feel some level of success and excitement and then continue. That is such a great application of psychology to implementation and sustainability.
Yes, and we know from psychology as well, but we've all experienced it in our work, that when we take the time to do this, and again, number one, it actually does not take that long, but when we do, it leads to successful implementation. It makes us feel better. It makes us feel confident. It increases our sense of self-efficacy, the belief that we can influence this again in the future. And that's in part us teaching our brain to do it again in the future. So it has so many good reasons to invest there.
Yeah. Well, since you offered, I would love to hear an example, a real life example, how you've applied this or helped the client apply this.
Yes. So, and what I'll do is just provide some information on each of the areas, because we're here and we don't have, just the hour to do this. But let's say the person starts thinking about their values, personal and professional. So they enjoy influence, they enjoy health, they enjoy relationships, for example. And that would be, usually I try to get them to get many more, like 10, 12, just so we can have really good color on what that looks like. Then they start looking at their sources of supply and demand. And as we can all imagine, the list of demands is much longer than they originally thought. They realize that a lot of what they're doing is running around trying to get things done and committing to more than is actually possible, and then not feeling great that so many of these things are not getting even touched. And on the supply side, things that they know would help them feel so good, like seeing my good friend, for example, is not even there because none of that is happening. Then they look at their context and they realize their context is even heavier than they realized it was. So now we have a much better perspective on, okay, things need to change. I'm going to, for example, pillar number 1 could be, I'm going to need to get better at assessing, at estimating time. So that could be pillar number 1, time estimates better. And so a concrete action there could be super simple. Could be that when I accept to do a project, I write for myself how long I think this is going to be. So I'm thinking it's 15 minutes. But I write it down. It's not just in my head. And then I commit to writing how long it actually took me. to do it. Oh, hour and 45 minutes. Okay, so next time that will inform how I create my time estimates. Or I'm planning to pick up someone at 10, I'm close by, I'm going to leave at 9:55. That means I'm going to be 10 out of 10 stressed out on the way there, hoping to make it and probably arrive at 10:07. So we've all done this. We're like, oh, why not? Seriously, why not leave at 9:45? We always have a phone with us. So worst comes to absolute worst, you'll have things you can do, right? So it could be leave a few minutes early, another action, right? So that's what pillar number 1 could look like. We may have a pillar number 2 called boundaries, where let's say I work from home from time to time, and let's say someone I love also lives here, partner, child, whatever. Maybe I can commit that if my door was open, so it's okay to come in and talk, instead of just turning around, stand up. Give them full attention. It's not actually going to take more time, but now I'm aligning how I'm responding here to my values. That connects better. It takes 0 time additional. It's just a different way of doing it. So these are examples of how, once we've done the exploration of what's going on in my current context, I can actually create a plan that will be actionable. And I've actually worked with someone who did a plan once in January last year, then because of a context, ended up hearing my keynote the second time on that topic. So she then came up there and realized her first plan had been fully implemented. She was ready for the next version, the same way like in business, right? We create a plan and at some point we need to evolve it. She was ready for this, and it was just, she was so excited. And I think it's very exciting because that's how it needs to be. These plans are things that need to be updated, informed by data, again, and by progress, and then they're alive.
I love this example and how you sort of walked us through creating something that was truly realistic and implementable. I'm curious, very quickly before our next ad break, what would somebody do if they had one of these sort of like overly optimistic, highly ambitious kind of personalities and had trouble kind of thinking through the supply demand stuff because it wasn't quite accurate. Like they felt like no problem, like this is not really a demand, right? How do they sort of like get through that?
How did they get to having an actual realistic list?
Yeah.
I know. It's the way that I in conversation, because sometimes people will just say, just talk me through it so we get the plan done like together. So sometimes that just works best. The way we'll often get there is, well, sometimes I poke. So I ask, what about this? What about that? You do this kind of work. Is this not happening kind of thing? So I'll help poke it. But sometimes by the virtue of staying on the list longer, just looking at the 2 things you wrote and saying, okay, what else is possibly there? Just that process will highly likely help you find things that maybe call them a 2 out of 10 level of intensity, but you'll find them.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think what that highlights is if this is something you recognize in yourself, that you do need to perhaps get a partner or several other people to provide you with a little bit of input, maybe work with them on your list and or work with a coach like MH, right? Who can like help you extract and pull out all of that stuff. So
you could,
yeah, go ahead.
This is a quick thing. Yes, you can ask others, and sometimes that will give you ideas, but be careful. Sometimes people will not put things on their list because they don't want to hurt others. So, right, yes. Yeah, they'll have someone in their life who is dealing with a health issue, and they say, well, obviously, yeah, I'll help them, but I cannot write this. Yes, you do. You want to write it and be realistic with it.
Very, very important point. Yes. So we're reaching another ad break. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest, Dr. M.H. Pelletier. When we come back, we will pull all of this stuff together with a little bit of takeaway, what you can take away from this time together and what to think through as your next steps. We'll be right back with our guest in just a moment. Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. M.H. Pelletier. And she has been sharing with us the resilience plan, and how to apply it to your work life and beyond. And we're going to start pulling it all together. MH, anything that we missed that we didn't touch on that you want to make sure to include as people start thinking through like their takeaways from this time together?
Well, you've asked really good questions. I think the ones that many ask themselves. One of the concepts that sometimes leaders will be familiar with, we're hearing a lot, have been hearing a lot about it, is the one of emotional intelligence. And it does connect, and at some point things will connect. Obviously, we're talking about us as humans and how we can bring these skills to our leadership in an effective way. And one of the core components of emotional intelligence at its basis is increasing our self-awareness, being more aware of how are we doing. And that's connecting very clearly with the structure of creating your strategic resilience plan. So what I would say is it's almost as if I did create this because so many leaders and professionals are getting so much done every day, incredible amounts, and high performers are doing this in a very consistent basis. But you get to a point where you need something to give you an edge. And just assuming you can wing your resilience or will it to be there is actually not going to work. But if you do have a strategic plan, it will help all of these aspects of your leadership that you wish to bring, the skills, the self that you want to bring to what you do, and will also allow you to bring your best to your professional life. And not only this is important now, it has been for a while, it continues to be important, but we're going to continue to face high demands with artificial intelligence coming even more into our work. The types of demands that leaders are facing include even more the human sides of what we do, the attention to what humans are experiencing and needing from you as their leaders, as you collaborate also with team members that are non-humans. And so if there's ever a time where you can, for some still proactively invest in something you're going to need for the next quite a few years, that I would say is the strategic resilience plan.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking about how more stretched thin people are than ever before. And I'm not sure many people realize that when we went into this sort of like hybrid remote kind of environment, we removed the sort of quiet spaces and time. Like when I walk over to somebody's cubicle and talk with them along the way to, going to get my, drink of water, or when I'm driving to and, back and forth from work, all of those are empty spaces that now, if you're working remote, have gotten like, lost. And between that and sort of like the feeling like you're in a sea of overconnection through social media and Zoom calls, but even more disconnected than ever before, this emotional intelligence piece is all about connecting, and it's all about self-awareness and checking in with yourself and sort of pausing and reflecting. And so many leaders have, such a hard time even finding the time and space to check in with themselves and others.
I know. It's yes, all this, everything you just said, very important. And and also what we're seeing is, so some individuals have worked virtually even more. And so also what's challenging at times is the desire and the opportunities at times to meet in person. But now that many schedules are built for virtual, actually going somewhere for in person is a whole new set of challenges. And so we do want, but it's worth investing in because we want human connections. We need them. We know now from emerging research about environments where AI is even more present, where humans are working even more with AI, sometimes almost exclusively, that you very much need to do deliberate efforts to have human interactions. Otherwise, you are seeing negative impacts on sleep, on relationships, on alcohol consumption as well. So we want to be very deliberate about this. To your point about sometimes finding time to check in with ourselves, here's something that I think we can all do. It takes about 5 seconds a day, but it allows you to keep track. And the side of you that loves simple and data-oriented might see how this works. You print a calendar from the internet, anywhere, or you create one by hand, and you post it on a wall where you visit every night. So wherever you're, say, brushing your teeth, for example. And every night, for each date, 0 to 10 scale, just overall how you were feeling today. 10 fabulous, 0 not good at all. Try to use nuances, not just these two, and put the number, right? It will take you 2 seconds. So 8, 8.5, 9, 9.7, 8.5, 7, 6.5, 6, 6. You're going to see it go down. You will catch it before you're at 0 and you have no choice. And of course, some of you are thinking, well, how valid is this tool? It doesn't matter. It's internally valid because it's always you rating it. And it will take you 2 seconds, so no one can say you don't have time. And it will allow you to catch it sooner, right? And then take actions and connect with supports around you. So that's a concrete, perhaps a small, concrete, easy tool to incorporate.
Love it. Love it. That's a fantastic takeaway. So how can people find out about you? And those of you who are watching live and or the recording, I'm also showing you what MH will share with us.
Yes. So website, you could go to drmarie-helene.com. You could go to theresilienceplan.com also, which gets you here at the same time and gets you on the website, to my book, to what I do. And you can connect on LinkedIn too. Always happy to connect with people there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all of this wisdom with us. Very excited to share it with others. Audience, listeners, what did you take away from today? And more importantly, what is one small change you can implement this week based on what you learned from MH? I just heard one great one she just mentioned, and that is an easy one that all of you can do. Whatever you choose to do out of the ideas that she shared with you, share it with us on LinkedIn. You can find us on at talkradio.nyc. You can find either of us on LinkedIn. We're also on Facebook, on Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, under talkradio.nyc. We're all over the place, but LinkedIn is where you find me and where I can cheer you on most, and where I will most likely respond. I think that's the same for MH. And
Yes.
yes. And in addition to being a live show, The Hard Skills is on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We post each week. Please go subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, share with others to increase our visibility, reach, and impact. The stuff we talk about on this show is part of also our research-based strategic leadership pathway model that we teach in our TowerScope Leadership Academy, which is a private coaching and learning community for socially conscious leaders in healthcare, academia, tech, and STEM industries looking to make a greater impact. So to check us out, you can go to gotowerscope.com and click on Leadership Academy. Thank you to talkradio.nyc for hosting. I am Dr. Mira Brancu, your host of the Hard Skills Show. And thank you for joining us today with our guest, Dr. MH Pelletier. Have a great rest of your day wherever you are tuning in from. Thank you, MH.
Thank you, Mira. It was a pleasure.
Bye, everybody.